It is the second week of Horror Mayhem, and it is time for Gothic horror. I actually consider Gothic horror to have two sort of subgenres. One of them being traditional Gothic horror, which is like when you think of Crimson Peak and sort of the British Gothic horrors, and then Southern Gothic horror, which has its own particular flavor of things. Gothic horror is kind of my favorite horror genre and also least favorite because you either hit it or you don't. Those are sort of my feeling, particularly on Southern Gothic horror. If you screw the pooch on that one, it's awful. If you're good with it, it's very good. Shirley Jackson is sort of my go-to for Southern Gothic horror, what that should be, because to me Southern Gothic horror is not so much events happening in a thing, it's a feeling. You know when you're reading a particular book whether it is Southern Gothic horror or if it is just a horror novel. And Shirley Jackson, I always pull up We've Always Lived in the Castle is the one of hers that just kind of nails it. It's a feeling of wrongness when you're reading things and things are just wrong. They feel wrong. The other one that I've read recently that hit that very well was Mexican Gothic. It actually felt like a Southern Gothic horror rather than just a traditional Gothic horror, which is a little more, like I said, Crimson Peak, all those sort of The Monk, all those sort of old books that sort of creepy houses with elements to them and different things like that. Now, Southern Gothic horror does have creepy houses and creepy stuff to it, but it also has a different flavor. There is a very distinct flavor to Southern Gothic. I'm mentioning all of that because the first one that I read for Gothic Horror Week was The Elementals by Michael McDowell. And everything that I can tell from Michael McDowell, if Shirley Jackson was the queen of Southern Gothic horror, I feel like Michael McDowell was probably the king of it. This book is Southern Gothic horror to the core. It takes place in Alabama, the Gulf Coast of Alabama, I believe, where they are. And the basic premise of the book is that there are two families, the Savages and the McCraes, and they've all kind of intermarried with each other. Luker is a McCrae. His sister Lee has married Dauphin, who is a Savage. And they all come down here because Dauphin's mother has died. Miriam Savage has died. She was a horrible person. That's just flat out. And we start this whole book with her funeral. It's done very, very weirdly. They have to, stab her at one point. There's a whole weird thing with it that goes on. And she has a terrible parrot, too, that talks and yells things. So or at least they think it yells things. So they're going along with this. After they have this funeral, they all decide they're going to go down to Beldame. Beldame are these three Victorian houses that their families have owned for a very long time on the Gulf Coast, near the water, at this lagoon. They go down there every summer. There's not really a phone or electricity or anything like that. And they go down there to sort of participate in their summer vacation, basically. And two of the houses, one is the Savage house, one is the McCrae house, and then there's the third house. The third house is abandoned because the third house, the sand dunes are taking over. The sand is taking over the houses. It is coming into it, and there is some talk that everybody's kind of scared of that house. Now, Luker's daughter is there. Her name's India. She's 13. And she's very curious about this house. And as time goes along, you start finding out more and more weird things that have taken place in this house, some weird events that have happened, some deaths. And it all starts very innocuously and then starts to snowball and roll downhill and be feels very, very wrong as it all rolls down. And that is a Gothic thing, too. That it all starts out kind of just a little weird, a few little weird things, a little weird feeling, and then it all hits the fan. And that is pretty much the case in The Elementals, because this all just seems like it's just an innocent family, Southern innocent family drama, and then things just get weirder and weirder and weirder. And eventually this sort of turns into really just an apocalyptic event here at the end, for the family anyway. And it's really good. I've lucked out with the 3 books that I've read so far that the supernatural horror were pretty good. This one is the best one I've read thus far. I'd started it before and just never finished it. And I finally got past the slower part at the beginning to get to that part. But this is the one I've read for Gothic Horror Week. I'm moving on then to the Woman in Black, which is a more traditional Gothic. That is we're in England, it's raining, there's a big old house and a ghost and whatnot with all of this. That is the thing with this part. The Elementals is not really a ghost story. It's got some horrifically creepy things that happen, but they're not ghosts. And they make a very big point about that. They are elementals. They are this other weird thing that's happening. And it's very, very different. And like I said, McDowell hits the nail on the head when it comes to what the wrongness of Gothic should feel like. And this book kind of does for Sand what I felt like Mexican Gothic did for Fungus. That it becomes its own thing in there, and just very, very good. I understand McDowell wrote the screenplay for Beetlejuice and The Nightmare Before Christmas. This has a little bit of that sort of off-kilter humor with different things and kind of off-kilterness, but this is a true Southern Gothic to the core. Enough that I want to read more of McDowell. And I cannot encourage you to read this one enough for getting your fix for some sort of Southern Gothic horror if you've never read one before or have never dealt with one before. Read this book.